Good evening. My name is Track, and I am the staffer of the Transgender Equity Council Policy Subcommittee. Before we begin, I'd like to note that this meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota statutes, Section 13D.021, due to the declared local health pandemic. The city will be recording and posting this meeting to the city's website and YouTube channel as a means of increasing public access and transparency. Board meetings are public and subject to the Minnesota Open Meeting Law. I will now call this meeting to order and call the roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum. And so I will now call the roll. Diana Anderson.
Here.
Billy Kurrick.
Here.
Nissa Mitchell.
Here.
Becca Sanborn.
Here.
Kenzie Weller.
Here.
And Taryn Wood.
Here.
Wonderful. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. And with that, we will proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's Legislative Information Management System, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. And because this is the first policy subcommittee meeting of the year, there are not previous minutes to adopt, but there is today's agenda to adopt if anyone wants to motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Great, that's a motion and a second, because that was like 3 people. And I'm gonna call real quick to vote on that. Diana?
Yes.
Billy?
Yes.
Nissa?
Yes.
Becca?
Yes.
Kenzie?
Yes.
And Taryn?
Yes.
Wonderful. There are 6 in favor, none opposed. The motion passes. The agenda is adopted. So moving into the agenda, what I set out for you all was just some space to think through 2022 policy goals. And I basically put in here the priorities that you all had established when we did strategic planning for the TEC, with some space to talk through where I knew there was ongoing work on them and where there wasn't. Space for you all to brainstorm what you want to move forward on that. And then also some time to talk through other ongoing projects, things we know are going to happen that you may want to be keeping an eye on or will need to give feedback on, even if they weren't priorities. Does that feel okay as a way to kind of move through today? Sweet. So I will kind of go to each priority that you identified before, and I will name if there is something I know that's going on that is a clear way for you to plug in. And if not, I'm just going to name the priority and kind of open the floor if there are any either like immediate actions that you all want to brainstorm next steps on or things you want to flag as actions you would want to take later on in the year. And that way we can kind of create the structure as much as we can be proactive for the whole year. So the first one is kind of like proactive prevention of book bans / support of trans youth in schools more broadly. And I know the only thing that I remember us discussing was just continuing to strengthen a partnership with MPS, since this is more so out of the TEC's jurisdiction, and figuring out what it looks like for the TEC to support this work there, but want to open it up if there are other ways you all would want to be moving around this or questions you have about what could be possible. If not, I will just continue to check in with Jason from MPS. We do our best to have monthly check-ins, although unsurprisingly, that has not happened recently with the strike and everything else. And I will keep you posted on what's going on. The next one was around decriminalization of sex work, and the ongoing work that's going on is the Sex Workers Outreach Project, starting to reconvene a decrim coalition to think about repeal of the loitering ordinance in Minneapolis. And I know there's a couple folks from the TEC who have volunteered to go to the first Decrim Coalition meeting because I'm not sure I can make it. I want to open up space for if there's other things that you all want to be thinking about in advance of or in addition to that.
This is Billy. I'm just wondering if it would make sense to follow up on, I know the Hennepin County attorney seat is up for election in November. And that's pretty powerful in terms of, like, I know that the attorney doesn't control sentence, like the Hennepin County attorney doesn't control sentencing, but like in terms of charging, they have all of the power. Sorry, my dog is gonna bark. 1 second. So I know that, so when that election's not until November, and I know that that's the county, not the city, but they do have the power to just not charge people for things. Like if you have someone who, you know, I don't know, should we even think about that or consider that as part of decriminalizing sex work? Or just maybe writing a letter as the TEC asking what candidates' position on a loitering ordinance or whatever would be.
Seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong on this track, but first I want to say, Billy, the fact that your dog is so strongly moved about decriminalization of sex work is inspiring to me. Sorry. Anyway, it feels like potentially getting involved in that as individuals we could probably do, but it is probably outside the scope of what we're able to do as the TEC. Even like writing a letter to candidates, I think probably might go beyond what we're allowed to do. Is that true?
I will be honest that I don't have great clarity. Like, I know you cannot speak as the city to other jurisdictions. I don't have great clarity on whether you can speak as the TEC and just be like, we know we have no authority, but we're people who were trusted to speak on issues like this in a different jurisdiction, so we have opinions anyway. I can't promise that you can't, but I definitely can't promise that you can, and that's something I can look into.
Yeah, the reason I ask is I know the commissioner is on in Denver, which, like I've said before, is very similar to this one and positioned very similarly. Our scope was advise, in that case, the mayor. So we more advise the council, I guess, in our situation. And we were told that anything that fell out of that would be considered like essentially trying to use our influence improperly. So I don't know. I feel like we would have to check is what I'm saying before we could do anything with that as the TEC. Not to say that we shouldn't like get like a side chat going for like how we can push on that.
Yeah, that I'm happy to look into that. I'm glad you brought that up. I also think for anyone here who is trying to go to the Decrim Coalition meeting, I think that's also a strategy question to bring up there for the larger coalition. Like, there are other groups associated with that outside of the TEC who could also try to figure out, like, where is that value in, like, pushing the county on that level too. So even if it's not the TEC, I think that's a great question. And Kenzie, I think you're one of the people hopefully going to the meeting. If I can't make it, would you be down to raise that? Sweet, thank you.
And this is probably outside the scope, but along that, it might be a decent idea to encourage SWAP and the Decrim Coalition to maybe do a candidate survey in that area. That might be a strategy that works, because I know there are several nonprofits and several advocacy groups who will get candidates to talk about their issues that way. And stuff. So, but that is probably something more for Kenzie to bring up at the Decrim Coalition meeting.
And the other good news is SWAP is actually going to be presenting at the next TEC meeting in April. So these are all things that we can continue to kind of brainstorm with them there as well. And I'm glad you all are already thinking about this. And I will say, since Decrim is or since the loitering ordinance is specifically going to be a city push, I think this will be something that gets figured out in coalition, but once we get further, there's definitely going to be space for the TEC to be reaching out to council members, because I think there will be a lot who will be willing to be won over, but won't be immediately on board without additional information. So that's a place long-term where I think the TEC can be really valuable in having some of those relationships already with council. Let's have other thoughts on decrim, people or Billy's dog. Also, welcome, Nomi. I know you had issues with the link, so you had to jump in late, but we are just kind of going through the TEC priorities for the year and thinking through strategy for all of them. So feel free to jump in with any additions or questions whenever you have them. And thanks for managing to join from the car.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm grateful to be here. I just picked up my girls, so I'm just headed home. I'll be home in a few, like 2 minutes. But I'll be out of traffic. I'm safe, so.
Sounds good. The next priority I had on this list was the gender equity terms and conditions in social services contracts. And the ongoing work that's obvious there to me is just, I am hoping that we are actually, and I know I've said this a million times, within a month or two of getting this through City Council. And that may again be a time when there's value in TEC, either direct reach out to council members or kind of a letter to the full council, naming your support. It's going to go initially through the Business Inspections, Housing and Zoning Subcommittee of Council, and then through full council, and should be able to have a majority vote in both, but is going to take some conversation and briefing of council members beforehand. I don't have a clear sense of rules beyond that, but if there are folks who are feeling particularly excited to talk about this with council members, I would love to know that, so that when we get to the point where I'm doing those one-on-one briefings, I can loop you in if it works for you. Is there anyone who's like, this is my issue, I want to talk to a council member?
Track question. Could you recap what this one is again?
Yes, thank you. Always ask me to recap things. I forget to do that. So we are trying to attach terms and conditions that are basically around equitable treatment of trans clients to the city's contracts with homeless shelters and other social service providers above a certain minimum dollar threshold, trying to not attach it to like tiny contracts where it would just be a barrier to getting funding from the city, but for the bigger ones, make sure that we support them in better serving trans folks as part of their work with us. And because it's technically an amendment to the city's form contract, we need a council vote on that in order for it to move forward. Did that help give you the info you need?
Yeah, so this is essentially, people we contract with would have certain statement about inclusivity or something like that.
Yeah, so the terms and conditions go into more detail than that. Like, we're requiring training for their staff, we're requiring updates to their intake processes if they have intake processes, updates to their grievance processes if they have those, that they're like, we're requiring some pieces around data collection, kind of doing a like, if you do have an in-person facility, change the signage on one bathroom to be gender neutral. Like if you have like if you're requesting donations of like materials, making that like looking for materials that'll serve trans people, updates on like how they navigate gender segregated spaces and who has access to what spaces. So yes, but in much more concrete than that, in the hopes that it's easy for them to implement.
Great, thank you.
I like this verbiage of supporting them in meeting the needs of trans clients, as opposed to telling them that they must in order to get money.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that is the goal, is like, these are all underfunded orgs. Many of them do want to do it and don't know how. Some of them do not, but we're going to assume best intention for now. And so, like, how do we help them? How do we make it easier for them to do this? Is there anyone who wants to be more plugged in to conversations with council members on this? Zero pressure, but want to offer it if this is someone's thing.
I guess I'll volunteer. Becca, thank you.
I'd be curious to hear about things as well. This was our major push when I was on a council in Denver, was this exact thing being in all of our contracts. So I'd be glad to be involved, though cannot guarantee that I'll be available during the times that we need.
No worries. I appreciate that from both of you, and we'll reach out to you once we get there. And if it works, great. And if not, no worries. I know everything is just like an extra voluntary meeting. Does anyone have any other thoughts on that one? If not, the next one is the creation of a Department of Public Safety, which, as a quick summary, so some people may know that this was on the ballot last November as an option to remove the Minneapolis Police Department and create a Department of Public Safety that MPD would be a division within, potentially, and that would include any other type of public safety work the city does. That ballot question failed. The other route to creating new departments is to get unanimous votes from the entire council and the mayor if you don't go the ballot route. And so there are some council members working on trying to create a Department of Public Safety. It looks different than the ballot question in a number of ways. The most obvious is that it does not currently involve MPD, nor does like the creation of this remove MPD from being a city department. But it would combine other things like 911 and fire and violence prevention as a couple examples that's not comprehensive, to kind of start the city in the process towards doing more holistic public safety work, and changing us from a like everything's siloed police only focus. The mayor is also, it seems, proposing a different version of this that does include MPD. I do not have a ton of information yet on what exactly that conversation looks like. And think I don't feel clear on how exactly he is envisioning MPD's role in his version and how the council members who are proposing their version are relating to his version. So I don't have all the information yet. I think there will definitely be, in any version, like needs to win elected officials over, and therefore places for the TEC to either advocate to individual elected officials or to them as a group. And I think there is going to be a lot of, the council members are trying to do a lot of community engagement around their version. And I think there's going to be space for just like spreading the word and helping recruit people to learn about this and to get more education around what this looks like. That is what I know so far on what's going on, which I know is incomplete because I found out about this mayoral version on Thursday and don't have enough info about it yet. But curious to hear if folks have either like specific questions that it's useful for me to try to look into for you, or other strategies and ways you'd want to see the TEC getting involved.
I think for me, given,
Oh, sorry.
oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I think for me, given the scope of this conversation and how like many people are involved in it and our kind of uncertainty around who's doing what at this point, I feel like maybe holding off on like active work on this until we know more about what the mayor is doing at the very least might just be beneficial, and then we can check back in and see what we need to do at that point. And I haven't seen any of the stuff that the mayor is doing, but it's like, there's part of me that's like, whichever one gets the most support, finding finding a way to push behind it if it actually does something beneficial. But so much of that is like big, huge political discussion that I'm not sure our lowly council can quite impact yet.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, like, any word on like how long this delay is gonna be, like timeline wise, like what are your thoughts, like ballpark?
That's a great question. I can tell you what I know right now, and I will keep trying to figure this out. So last week, council was supposed to direct staff to draft an ordinance kind of explaining what their version could look like. And that choice to direct staff got postponed 2 or 3 weeks. So in the next council cycle, they will either direct staff to draft an ordinance or postpone it further. And the mayor brought up his version publicly when he presented to city council last week about how we're implementing the new governance structure, the executive mayor legislative council that also got voted on in November. And he has a follow-up presentation to them in like 3 weeks. I don't know if he will talk more about this part then, or maybe elsewhere in another like press conference or something that I'm not yet aware of, but that is the next date I am paying attention to where I know we might hear something from the mayor. It's possible that what we'll hear from him then is more about other pieces of the governance structure and doesn't touch this office, though. But I feel great about just continuing to keep an eye on all of this, trying to get myself clearer information and therefore you all clearer information and you figuring out where to move from there. Sweet. Civil rights ordinance adding weight, height, body size as protected classes. My understanding from our meeting, and folks who were there, please add, is that civil rights is looking into updating the list of protected classes and is down to consider this when they do, but they are not quite sure like when this year that'll happen, and they're super understaffed right now, and that there is possibly a role for the TEC in being in conversation with them about that once they get there. But right now we're just kind of waiting to hear from them that they have started that work. So correct me if I'm wrong, and please add or ask questions if there's other things you would want to be doing sooner.
Yeah, it sounds like they're just waiting until they have the staff and the capacity to tackle that. So whenever they do get to that, I would be happy to be involved in some way.
Got that. Sounds good. And then kind of you all had a priority around policing that included both expanding the mental health responders and banning no-knock warrants. The ongoing work, as is obvious to me there. So in terms of the mental health responders, expanding them will be mostly, I'm guessing, the 2023 budget process. So November and December of this year, there will be space for you all to advocate on that. My guess is there won't be anything around that sooner. The city is putting out a social media campaign with the hashtag I am Minneapolis to talk about their reimagining public safety work. Right now, there's a bunch of videos about the mental health responders, and then coming up soon will be videos about like the things that have been moved out of MPD that are now handled by traffic control or 311. And an ask has gone out for all appointed board members if they want to share this on their social media and kind of spread the word about what this is. So the other pre-budget, the clear role for the TEC, not in terms of expanding and funding the mental health responders, but just in terms of spreading community word, is to spread that social media if you want. It's on the city's like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I think that's it, maybe more, I don't know. But that's what I have on that. And then ongoing work on the ban on no-knock warrants. The mayor held a press conference where he announced kind of high level his proposed policy 2 weeks ago. Big thank you to the TEC members who joined listening sessions to kind of advocate and ask questions around that policy. I have no clarity on what happens next, and he didn't give a clear timeline on when there will be an actual written policy that people can reply to, as opposed to just his summary of it in the press conference. So I think if TEC members wanted to follow up on anything you heard from the listening sessions or from that press conference, either individually as individual humans or as the TEC collectively, you could absolutely do that. The city has not created a space for engagement right now, but that is where we're at in the process. And if you wanted to reassert things that came up in those listening sessions for people who were there, like the TEC could write a letter after the next meeting or something like that. So that's where both of those are at. I'm curious if folks have questions, suggestions, additions, etc.
This isn't a question, it's a comment. It's just mind-boggling how long it takes something like this to get put in place. Just absolutely ridiculously mind-boggling. Anyway.
Yes. I will move on to the last priority I have then, and then we can jump into just some of the other things that are going to be happening. But the last priority you all named was around rent control and housing equity. And so there's two ongoing things, or hopefully ongoing things, that I know about. One is theoretically pretty soon, the city is actually going to form a work group to start developing a framework for a rent stabilization proposal. If there are, I don't remember all of the deadlines by which that work group would need to create a proposal in order for it to successfully end up on the ballot in 2023, but there is kind of, there are deadlines in order for them to create a proposal that could then get voted on in 2023. So I think there is space for the TEC to push around how soon this work group starts, what voices are included on this work group, around once this work group is actually able to move forward, like lifting up and supporting the recommendations of the work group. I am hoping to find out more about where this is going to be at than I know right now, but I really don't have much more than that at the moment. And then the other thing is tenant opportunity to purchase, which gives tenants the first option to buy a house if their landlord is selling it before it gets put on the regular market, is theoretically a policy that's going to go through council in the next few months. There will be opportunities for advocacy, both to strengthen the policy and to just support it passing. And that is definitely a place where the TEC can write a letter in support, or organize yourself or others to speak at public hearings or anything like that. So again, that's kind of what I've identified. Curious to hear questions, thoughts, pieces of that you're like, we definitely want to do that, so let's vote on that in advance so we can make it move forward, or anything like that.
Track. I am wondering if you have a general read of where city council members are in regards to TOPA. I know that there are some people who are all for it, some people who are hesitant. I'm wondering if maybe we could think about doing a more intentional outreach, more intentional meetings with those like more hesitant council members. You know, maybe we talk about people that live in under their jurisdiction, reaching out and saying like, hey, I really want to support this. I hope that you do as well. So just wondering if you have a gauge on that.
Yes, I am making a note to myself to try to find that out more, and then going to answer your questions. but I don't have a full gauge. My sense is a decent number are supportive, but not necessarily all. I mean, the council members that generally get summarized as the progressive council members, I think are all supportive. Beyond that, I don't have a person by person read on it. I'm not positive whether or not there is an assumed majority who's supportive right now. And I don't remember if the mayor is supportive. If he's not, they would need a veto-proof majority, which is 9 in order to prevent a veto. So I don't have that right now. I can try to get that information. But what I will say is I think the more the TOPA policy gets strengthened, so like one conversation I know is going on right now is that it does not apply to landlords who own 5 or fewer properties, which excludes almost all of the otherwise potentially eligible properties in certain parts of the north side. So it wouldn't really apply to north side renters. And so there's a push from a couple council offices and many community members to bring that 5 or fewer down to like 3 or fewer or 2 or fewer. And I think the more the policy gets strengthened, the more there's going to need to be a push with some of the council members who are on the fence. But what I have heard is that even some of the more conservative council members are really into the idea of homeownership and supporting homeownership. And because TOPA is focused on pathways to homeownership, it is an easier sell than some of the other housing equity work that is going on. So that's my high level summary. I will try to get more specifics on who it would be useful for the TEC to meet with. I think that is a great idea. But that's kind of my read on it overall at the moment.
Track, would it be helpful if we just called their office maybe and said, what is your position on TOPA as it stands right now?
Yeah.
Should we just make an Excel spreadsheet and kind of give everybody 1 or 2 people to call? Like as a committee of however many we are, just taking 1 or 2 council members to call throughout the week and just say, just wondering, what is your position if you have one?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think there's a couple council offices that I can tell you are supportive, like particularly the ones who are co-authoring it. But I think it is valuable for council offices to be able to say, look, I have constituents in support of it. So doesn't hurt to even call those if you want to. Like maybe your question is more like, I know you're a co-author. I'm in support. I'm checking who's in support. Or are there any amendments you want to see? Like maybe with the ones you know are supportive, your question is about amendments. I can, when I send out notes, send out a spreadsheet for people to sign up for an office or 2 to call. And I will put phone numbers in there so that you actually can call them.
Track, you always make it so easy for us. Thank you.
Thank you. I try. That's also my job, but.
Can you also make it so that all the council members just follow us on Instagram and read our stories when we post them? That would be great for me.
I think you really overestimate my power, and also I would really like none of the council members on my Instagram stories, but if you want it, I'm happy to direct them to yours.
I have a separate private. It's cool.
Sweet. Do folks have other thoughts on this TOPA, rent stabilization, or anything else housing related? Sweet. Then I will jump with our last little bit into other ongoing projects. So just kind of flagging like work that is actively moving out of past recommendations, even if you all didn't name it as a priority this year. Safe use sites, which are supervised places where people can use injection drugs that significantly prevent the risk of overdoses. but are like a legal process to figure out how to do. There is a conversation later this week between a couple interested council offices and some of the community groups who are working on this. So I will have more information after that and report back. I think the process for a long time is just going to be kind of like figuring out legal strategy before it gets anywhere near like putting something in the budget or anything like that, but I will keep you posted when it is getting to that point. I think there's been intentionality around let's start this work not loudly so that people who are going to be opposed to it aren't like spending their energy getting in the way before it's even started, which is why the TEC never ended up like sending the letter to council that they wrote about supporting this or anything like that. But that letter exists to be used at the point when this work is getting louder. That's my read right now on what's going on. Again, curious to hear questions or suggestions.
One thing worth mentioning, just in terms of the public conversation, and I sent you an email about this, or I sent you and the co-chairs. John Oliver did his deep dive segment last night on harm reduction and safe use sites and talked about the legality of them. So it is in the public sphere. And usually, in my experience, when something gets covered by John Oliver, it usually pops up as something that can help convince the more neoliberal or the more centrist versions of the populace that, hey, it might be okay to start exploring this. So in terms of the public conversation, that might help.
Helps when a white guy in a suit says it.
With a British accent, no less.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that if there are other places where you're seeing either like things happening in other cities or things in the public conversation that would be useful to kind of hold onto for when you all need to maybe do more direct advocacy on this, please feel free to send them my way, collect them in a Word document, whatever. But those are all useful resources. Supplier diversity, essentially expanding the city's definition of like preferred businesses to work with to also include LGBTQ, disabled, and veteran-owned businesses. It is, folks who were on the TEC last year heard a presentation about this. It is looking right now like it won't be possible to do that for a couple years until after the city does their next what's called a disparity study and essentially like statistically proves the need for it so that they have legal backup in court for doing it. So I think that would be a pretty hard push to make anything move beforehand, and Twin Cities Quorum, which is the org that presented, would need to have a lot of capacity to kind of lead that push, I think, for you all to be able to work in coalition with them. So my sense is that is a little bit paused, but if folks want to try to figure out how to push that sooner or have questions, definitely down to talk through that.
Quick question is this disparity study something that happens every however many years?
Yes, I forget the however many, but that is correct.
Okay.
That was the most eloquent sentence I've said today. Race equity becoming a department. So one of the things from your recommendations was race equity moving from being a division to being a department with more authority. We have a director as of today. She started this morning. That is great news for me and for the work. And I just talked with the co-chairs today, and I'm going to bring more updates to the full TEC meeting around like what it would look like to try to strengthen race equity, which would then create more strength behind all of the work you're trying to do. I think part of race equity becoming a department at this point is going to look like kind of integrating that process with the reorganization of the city departments that's happening as a part of implementing this executive mayor legislative council governance structure. And so I think there is space for the TEC to maybe advocate around race equity becoming a department, around where race equity sits. Do they report directly up to the mayor and have that level of access to him? Are they a couple levels down? Are we a couple levels down in the org chart? If there are other things you want to see that I'm not thinking of, I think there will be space for the TEC to reach out to the mayor's office around that. Once I've had a director for more than a day and we get a little clearer on how things are trying to move forward. And once I have been able to prep some more of the information, I'm going to try to give to the full TEC meeting. And I think, knock on wood, that is nowhere near me. If that were to happen by the end of this year, there is a big opportunity for a budget push in the 2023 budget of let's actually give this department programming money and increase staffing. Because we have 4 staff roles in the department right now. Like we have 2 people, but once we hire the other 2, it will be a 4-person office, which is significantly shrunk from what it used to be. And there is going to be a budget request to increase the staffing of the office. So those are the clearest things to me, is advocacy to the mayor around governance structure, which honestly, I need to wrap my head around that more with my new director. But I will have more updates for you by the full TEC meeting. And based on what those are, if someone wants to, like, if it seems already like, okay, the TEC could write a letter to the mayor right now, like we should get moving on that, that may be something that's worth voting on in this upcoming TEC meeting. And I'm kind of putting that out there so that you all can propose that if it makes sense. I don't have quite enough clarity on what's going on to give you enough information because she just started today. But that is my sense on that. Please feel free to ask me questions because that feels like actually the least eloquent thing I said today.
I have no questions track, but I am just so happy for you specifically that there is now a director.
Okay, and then the last few things I have, so I just presented to council last week, 2 weeks ago, I have no idea, about a hopeful initiative to incentivize, basically making most of the single stall bathrooms anywhere in the city gender neutral. So not just single stall bathrooms in like city capital C buildings, but single stall bathrooms in Minneapolis. That for that incentive to move forward, it would need funding from the American Rescue Plan Act Phase 2, or otherwise it would need external funding, because we're trying to send out a bunch of mailings, we're trying to translate the mailings so they're multilingual, we're trying to train staff, and we're trying to buy a bunch of bathroom signs so that businesses can just request a bathroom sign from the city and put it up and don't have to spend any money on the process. It's not super expensive, but all of those things have a small cost associated. I have proposed to the mayor that we get American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA Phase 2 funding for this. If he does not put this project in his ARPA Phase 2 proposed budget to council, there is space for the TEC to advocate to council and ask them to amend it, which I think a decent number of council members would be supportive of. If neither of those things happen, we'll seek out external funding. It does feel very possible that we could get external funding, but would obviously be great if the city was just already setting up a way to pay for this in-house. So that is the clear next step there, and I will keep you all updated on what the mayor does, but it may be a pretty quick turnaround between when he proposes the budget and like when you all would have to advocate. I don't know if there would be a TEC meeting in between where you could vote on a letter. So this feels like one of those things where if you wanted to even at the next meeting do a kind of in advance, like voting on, if it's not in the mayor's budget, we're going to write a letter as the TEC to council. this is one of those ones that I want to like time flag for you.
So just to be clear, this wouldn't be like setting up a new law that requires gender neutral bathrooms, but rather an educational push to encourage businesses to switch over.
Yes, we can't
Okay.
require gender neutral bathrooms
Yeah.
because the
Sorry.
state requires them for buildings built after 2020. And once the state has a law on this, we can't also make a law on this. So we just have to try to enforce for the buildings where it is required and incentivize it for everyone else.
Great. So I think proposing it as a, like, flag it up as a letter at the next meeting would be good.
And then the last things, and I know we're pretty close to time. Oh, Nissa, did you unmute to say something also?
I was just going to make a comment that I really want to see what these mailers are going to look like. Just like a bunch of smiling faces, just like, please, let us use the bathroom. Please, sir. I would like to use the bathroom.
I tried hard not to convey too much of that energy, but it's impossible for it to be absent, and I am happy to send over the draft language if you want to see it.
Could it just be the Oprah meme where she's like, you get a bathroom sign, you get a bathroom sign? It's just like free bathroom signs for everybody. Like, that's how we'll incentivize it.
I mean, the mailer can't be, but we're gonna have a social media push through the city's social media, and I think there are pros and cons of like really going the meme route on the city's social media, but if it felt like the pros outweighed the cons, yes, please. To
As
anyone
long as we
watching
can
this
get
meeting,
the city of Minneapolis's TikTok to cover it, I think would be good.
City of Minneapolis does have a TikTok, so
It is great.
I missed that job posting. I don't know when that was posted, but dang.
one person runs all of our social media. It is not even a separate job posting. That is a tidbit you didn't actually need.
Well, tell him he's doing a great job with the TikTok.
Okay, I'm composing myself because we only have a couple minutes left. The last few things are just the like big moments in the year. So I feel like we talked through like, here are the policies, here are some potential plans for each of them so that when we get to that point in the year, you all can just kind of go. The other big moments in the year in general are, as I mentioned, the ARPA Phase 2 budget. Like the bathrooms is one funding proposal for that, but there will be other things you all might want to advocate on. It's theoretically sometime in the spring, but it keeps changing, so I don't know when it is. I'm going to try to see if there is an answer to that before the TEC meeting. The annual budget, which is a November-December process, where you all can kind of respond to the mayor's proposed budget and push council to make certain amendments, and or if there are things you really want to see departments doing, if you can, in the next like 2 months, if you can get that to departments, you could try to get them to propose that in their budget to the mayor, so you get way ahead of the process. And then the last thing is annual TEC recommendations, which most years tend to be kind of like taking the past year's recommendations, carrying forward a lot of what hasn't been done yet, and then adding in things you've identified as new priorities or that are new policies council members are working on that you want to see move forward. But I think that's kind of some of the work for the next few months, is to start to pull together that. And if there is anything that you want to see an office spending money on and doing that they might not be already requesting in their 2023 budget, that deadline is actually like sometime in May. And so that is just something we can discuss more in the next TEC meeting. That is something that like if folks wanted to go do some brainstorming around and bring specific ideas back to the next TEC meeting. But those are the like points in the year as well. I guess my only question is if there is anything that's most useful for me in like how I'm structuring our time as a policy subcommittee to set you all up for success in advocating around some of these like either big policies that we know are going to happen or big processes like budget that we know are going to happen, because I can structure these meetings however is most useful for you.
I feel like maybe we could talk strat at our next subcommittee meeting. Just because I don't know that we could have a like full fleshed out plan, you know, for the remainder of the meeting in 1 minute. I also wanted to ask if there's anyone who wants to report back at the next TEC meeting. Because if not, I took a lot of notes. So, track, put me down.
That was my last question, so perfect, thank you. And I will send out my notes as well, so everyone has them for reference, along with a spreadsheet to call council members and ask them about TOPA. Does anyone have any last questions or anything before we wrap up? Sweet. Thanks y'all so much for being here. Oh, we need a motion to adjourn. I forgot.
Motion to adjourn.
Sweet. Thanks, Nissa. Okay.
Happy to have fun. And Matthew, Biden says that he